A native Japanese translator has discovered the true meaning of haki and claims that emu is haki itself. Let's take a look, and I want to tell you that if you put this video on in the background while you're doing anything, you know you can leave it in the comments because I love reading them and I'm very curious. If you put it on to sleep, I also want to tell you good night. Alright, let's begin. Haki has become one of the most important concepts in the entire history of One Piece. And pay attention, even before Blackbeard uttered the word haki for the very first time in Jaya, the idea had already been subtly hinted at throughout the entire series. For example, when Shanks startled the Sea King with a single powerful shout, or when Zoro managed to truly feel the very breath of nature within his swords. Even so, there are still many things about haki that we don't fully understand. What the hell exactly is haki, and why is haki so incredibly effective against the abilities of devil fruits? Could Nami actually be a haki user or not? And when we're talking about haki, probably the most important figure of them all is Emu. Think about it. Not even an individual as formidable as Rocks, despite his incredibly potent haki, could withstand the Domi Reversi technique. This clearly indicates that Emu possesses a haki so utterly overwhelming that it has the capability to completely nullify Rocks' own haki, which itself is powerful enough to maintain a Devil Fruit's abilities active, regardless of any situation. And from this, I've drawn a singular, undeniable conclusion. Emu is haki personified. So in this video, I'm going to thoroughly break down the mechanics of haki, and from that point, I will delve into the true nature of Nerona Emu. Let's begin with the fundamental idea behind the concept of haki. Just consider the word haki itself. It is composed of two distinct kanji characters, ha and ki. The kanji ha is the same one used in words like hegemony or conquer, and it conveys the idea of dominating others or imposing oneself with superior force. And the kanji ki is an abstract concept in Japanese that refers to things like spirit, energy, atmosphere, or one's mental state. So originally, haki refers to a kind of very powerful willpower, the overwhelming aura that a person emanates. But how does One Piece define it exactly? According to the series, haki is the power of will that exists within every single human being, and that includes all races, fishmen, giants, everyone. More specifically, it's a general term for invisible sensations such as presence, fighting spirit, intimidation, or killer intent. Basically, it's the energy, the mind, the inner strength that circulates within you. If we observe the effects of armament haki, like when you harden your arms or legs until they become as hard as steel, or the way observation haki even allows you to see a bit into the future, it's easy to confuse haki with some kind of special power, like a devil fruit, but that's not its true essence. At its core, haki is simply an extension of willpower. Have you ever heard anything like this? When someone is facing extreme danger, their senses sharpen, and it's like time slows down. Scientifically, it's not that time literally slows down, but your brain speeds up, adrenaline kicks in, your focus narrows, and your senses sharpen. A perfect example is Zoro's fight against Mr. 1. Dad Bones. It is at that very moment when Zoro is able to feel the breath of the stone and the trees all around him. It's very likely that being pushed right to the brink of death sharpened his senses and caused him to awaken his haki later on. Kobe also seems to have awakened his observation haki during Marineford, after the emotional impact he suffered right in the middle of the battlefield. In the world of One Piece, haki is broadly divided into three types: observation haki, armament haki, and conqueror's haki. In translations, the original nuance is often lost, but in Japanese, each of these specific names carries a kanji character that directly signifies color, which is pronounced shoku. Metaphorically speaking, color within this particular context also conveys the meaning of type or category. Even though haki is fundamentally understood as the power of one's will, these three distinct forms are simply different colors, representing unique expressions of that very same underlying spiritual force. There is an interesting detail that you can only notice in the colored versions of the manga. In One Piece, especially when it comes to Conqueror's haki, the aura is different depending on the character. Shanks, Roger, and Luffy all show their Conqueror's haki in a distinct red color. Zoro's is green, Big Mom's is pink, and Kaido's is purple. This visual difference likely intends to show that each person's haki has its own color, its unique nature. Rayleigh himself explains it like this: most people gravitate towards the haki color they excel at. Discover which color suits you best and focus on developing it. If you strengthen each color, you will broaden the variety of things you can do, and the part I want to highlight is the effect of Luffy's Conqueror's haki. Normally, when Luffy uses his Conqueror's Haki, it's almost always depicted with a red color, but there's one exception. When Luffy activates Gear 5 for the first time, at the instant he transforms into Nika, his Conqueror's Haki shows flashes of yellow. That yellowish aura only appears at that moment, solely during his initial transformation into Nika. After that, all of Luffy's Haki returns to its usual red color. By now, you must surely understand what this implies. That yellow color probably isn't Luffy's color at all, but someone else's Conqueror's Haki. When Kaido said there was someone else on the rooftop and asked Luffy, "Who the hell are you?" it was undoubtedly because he perceived a presence that did not belong to Luffy. The distinct trace of another will clearly manifested through the Conqueror's Haki, and the only individual who could possibly fit this description is Joy Boy. It is most probable that when Joy Boy awakened Nika's power 800 years ago, remnants of his Haki were left within that very fruit. When Luffy finally awakened it, that residual Haki burst forth, and that brief yellow flash precisely represented that very phenomenon. We also received a significant new clue regarding Haki, stemming from the conversation between Roger and Garp as they fought against rocks with the Domi Reversi in God Valley. And they say this phrase, and Oda even highlighted it, so it's clearly something we should pay attention to. So you plan to stamp your Conqueror's Haki on it using your maximum mass. The key word here is Ma Gakunon Masa. That same term was used before when Vegapunk explained the concept of the soul. A scholar from West Blue once said that humans lose 21 grams of mass when they die, meaning 21 grams is the weight of the soul. Now we have two distinct instances in the story where the idea of mass appears. One is connected to Haki, and the other is connected to the soul. This strongly backs up what I've said in earlier videos. Haki and the soul are deeply and directly connected. Odin said this right before he died. "You can forget me, my soul will live on." And here's where I want you to remember Enma, the sword Hiyori gave Zoro. Enma constantly drained Zoro's Haki, and when Zoro battled Kaido, he remarked that he could sense Odin's presence within Zoro's strike, that Odin's very soul literally resides inside Enma in the form of Haki. Odin must have understood this profound possibility, which is why he uttered those final words. So, in the world of One Piece, people's souls can transform into Haki and continue to reside somewhere even after their death. And that brings us to Brook's famous phrase, "Music stirs the soul." That's exactly what happens in that scene. Enma reacts to the song Tsukihime, which Hiyori plays, and we recall that Odin loved that melody when Hiyori performed it as a child. And the moment she plays it again, the sound of her shamisen reaches Enma. There is no doubt about it, the one reacting is Odin's soul, which still resides within the sword. This means that Odin's soul has taken on the form of Haki and continues to live inside Enma, even to this day. This also makes us pay close attention to Roger's final words before his death. Just as Odin's soul continued to live on in Enma, this line might also be suggesting that Roger's soul too dwells somewhere, and this scene is particularly interesting. When Roger steps off the Oro Jackson for the very last time, he hands his pirate hat, the hat he always wore, to Shanks. It is very possible that Roger's soul, that is to say, his Haki, is imbued in that hat. In One Piece, one of the most important inherited objects is, of course, the straw hat. Even this hat could hold someone's Haki, someone's soul passed down through the generations. Emu might have kept that giant straw hat in Mary Joy's so that no one could inherit the will that it carries within. And what seems craziest to me about all of this is that you haven't liked the video, even though you're clearly enjoying it, so do it right now. See? That's much better. Let's continue on with the video. And speaking of souls that inhabit objects, we have mentioned many times the white trees of Shandora. It is said that the souls of the ancestors who died on the island of Jaya over hundreds of years lived inside these white trees. But Honu, the doctor who traveled with Nolan, discovered that those white trees were already infected with tree fever. Have you noticed something? Why, out of all the vast lands of Jaya were precisely the white trees that carried the souls of the ancestors the first to be infected with tree fever. Where did that disease come from in the first place? It could be that with the passing of the years, as more and more souls of the ancestors, in other words, Haki, accumulated within those trees, the pressure became too much for them. In the end, the trees could not withstand the weight of that spiritual energy and succumbed to illness. And if that is indeed the case, then perhaps the very same thing happened to Roger. Kaido commented that Roger was not a user of any devil fruit and that in the end, only Haki surpasses everything. This implies that the king of the pirates, Roger, was constantly using Haki at a level far above that of any other pirate. It's very possible that Roger's own body couldn't withstand the overwhelming power of his Haki, and that's what caused his incurable illness. And just look at what happens when Luffy uses Gear 5. Kaido said that Gear 5 envelops Luffy in both Armament Haki and Conqueror's Haki. And what happens to Luffy when he keeps using Gear 5? His body is aging very rapidly. This suggests that using Haki excessively imposes a truly enormous burden upon the body. If someone were to constantly push their Haki beyond its natural limits, their immune system could gradually weaken over time, making them significantly more susceptible to illness. It's quite possible that Joy Boy's ultimate defeat was also a result of this very same phenomenon. His own incredibly overwhelming Haki may have pushed his physical body far beyond its breaking point, until he simply could no longer endure or withstand the strain. Now, what about Emu? Clearly, he is also using an abnormal level of Haki. Oda is probably keeping his appearance hidden because this is connected to this entire matter. There is something about Emu's actions that we must pay very close attention to. Whenever Emu travels and moves throughout the world, he does not appear by way of the abyss like the God's Knights or the Five Elders do. Instead, he manifests by possessing the body of someone else. Basically, it could be said that Emu already possesses a power of another level, one that doesn't even depend on their body wearing down, and almost with total certainty it's thanks to the devil that has latched onto them. Literally, Emu must have made a pact with that devil, giving up their own soul by allowing a parasitic devil to cling to a soul that already possessed the world's most powerful Haki. The being that we now know as Emu came into existence. That's why Emu can freely separate their body and soul, something no ordinary person could ever achieve. The power that keeps me alive isn't my organs or my muscles, it is my very soul. This statement applies perfectly to Emu as well. Brook can also move in soul form, but the great difference between him and Emu is that Brook doesn't possess Conqueror's Haki, and Emu certainly does. Conqueror's Haki is something that cannot be trained. You can only learn to control its power, and it grows exclusively as the individual matures. So, if my hypothesis that the soul is equivalent to Haki is correct, then Emu is essentially capable of transforming his soul directly into Haki, granting him the greatest degree of Haki control throughout the entire world of One Piece. Brook once said, "My soul emits an energy that is almost solid, so it can remain in this world." The soul of Emu has existed in the world of the living for 800 years. If her soul has been radiating energy all that time, naturally that energy would have been refining itself over the centuries until it became the most powerful kind of Haki. With that idea in mind, watch this scene. Luffy unleashes Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki on Egghead. Immediately after, Emu senses Joy Boy's presence and begins to tremble. This means that Haki can travel instantly, even across almost the entire planet, and when Conqueror's Haki is activated, it produces a visual lightning effect. This image could be implying that Haki moves at the speed of light, and does that mean that when Emu sits in Mary Joizy's flower room, their soul leaves their physical body and transforms into Haki, traveling across the world at an incredible speed? Then they possess the Five Elders or the God's Knights wherever they are, and that's how Emu moves without physically moving. Despite how important Haki is, there are still people who have a negative impression of it. Some readers were disappointed by Kaido's line. Ultimately, Haki surpasses all, and I truly understand that. One of the most enjoyable aspects of One Piece has always been how clashes between different devil fruits can completely change the outcome of a fight. Even abilities that at first glance don't seem to be designed for combat can overcome something far more powerful depending on how they are put together. If everything were decided only by Haki, we'd lose that surprise factor, and the story wouldn't be so exciting. But recently, we've learned something important. The fact that someone has very powerful Haki doesn't automatically mean they're the strongest. I'm sure two scenes immediately came to your mind. The first is the phrase I mentioned earlier, "Don't doubt yourself." That is strength. As I explained before, the essence of Haki is the power of will. So no matter how powerful someone's Haki might be, if their mental state is unstable, if they are feeling anxious, confused, or even afraid, then the Haki they attempt to use can be completely neutralized. In fact, we have witnessed this many times throughout the series. Garp once told Kazan, "A man who hesitates is weak." And during the Marineford War, the very reason Garp couldn't stop Luffy was because at that crucial moment he was filled with hesitation. Zeph, who used to be a pirate in the Grand Line, explained the same idea. In a life or death battle, the moment someone cowers at the thought of dying, they crumble. I believe Zeph said that because he understood the true nature of Haki. Ultimately, that slight tremor in the heart is exactly what robs a person of their willpower. A perfect example is Sanji and Black Maria's interaction. Sanji can use his armament Haki to protect himself, but he himself admits that against a woman, his armor turns soft. Partly it's because he doesn't want to harm a woman with his Haki, but at the same time, his mind gets altered. You know how nervous and perverted he gets, and that throws him off balance. His emotions are wavering, and that prevents his Haki from working at its full potential. Blackbeard himself made a similar statement in Amazon Lily. Honestly, no man could possibly resist her power. Yeah, at first glance, one would assume that Haki could block any Devil Fruit ability, but after everything we've discussed, the answer is obvious. Haki is willpower, so if a user's heart becomes captivated by a woman's charm, their Haki automatically loses its effect and they end up turned to stone. Even Katakuri, who has one of the most advanced observation Haki, fell victim to this very weakness. When Luffy saw him eating something Katakuri didn't want anyone to see, Katakuri's refined observation Haki suddenly stopped working. The shame and emotional shock made him lose focus, and for a moment he couldn't properly use his Haki. Sanji once called Big Mom an iron balloon, and Bege agreed with that description. Big Mom's body is incredibly resilient, not only due to her natural durability, but because she constantly coats herself in Haki. But when Mother Caramel's photo was broken and Big Mom suffered an emotional collapse, she suddenly became vulnerable because the emotional shock broke her concentration, weakening the Haki she always used to protect herself. There's also an example from Gact, where Luffy, whose body is rubber, ends up completely beaten by Nami, and Nami can't even use Haki. But even that comes down to Luffy's mental state. When Luffy heard Absalom plan to marry Nami, he casually remarked, "Wow, marrying Nami, you've gotta have guts." So for Luffy, seeing Nami furious basically scares him. Oda even responded to a question about why Nami's punches work on Luffy's rubber body, and he said, "When someone hits a nakama, it's a form of discipline. There's love behind it. That's why it works. It touches the heart." This shows that Haki at its core is directly linked to emotion and willpower. And seeing it this way, Garp's phrase, "A punch filled with love cannot be blocked," proves to be entirely true. The same thing happened in God Valley. Rox was an incredibly powerful Haki user. When his Haki clashed with Herald's and Mary Joaz, their confrontation supposedly wiped out all silhouettes within a 5-kilometer radius. His Haki was so strong that it even slowed the healing of Garling's immortal body. So how was someone like Rox subdued with the Domi Reversi so easily? Let's consider the moment just before the Domi Reversi was applied to Rox. Emu deliberately directed his gaze towards the forest, then brought up the precarious situation of Rock's wife and his son. In other words, Emu subtly hinted that their very lives were at stake, just enough to deeply unsettle Rox's heart and plunge him into an unstable mental state, which then made it considerably easier to complete the Domi Reversi. It's quite possible that Garp's famous phrase, "A man who hesitates is weak," stems precisely from witnessing that very moment. The same idea applies to the giant warrior pirates. Just before they suffered the Domi Reversi, their hearts grew weak when they saw their wives and loved ones were in danger. That emotional alteration probably made it a piece of cake to dominate them. Emu also stated that there was no king easier to control than Herald, and that's surely because Herald is a monarch who constantly struggles internally between peace and violence. Now, let's examine the relationship between Haki and devil fruits. To put it simply, in the world of One Piece, every person has Haki within them, meaning everyone possesses a soul. And as I explained before, the easiest way to understand it is to think that Haki is the form your soul takes when it manifests. Every person carries a soul inside their body, and when someone eats a devil fruit, the devil of that fruit attaches itself to their soul like a parasite, and this is what grants them their abilities. The fact that Brook returned from the afterlife by pure willpower demonstrates something important. The powers of a devil fruit do not cling to the physical body, they cling to the soul. Thinking about it this way, it is much easier to explain the relationship between Armament Haki and Logia type users. Armament Haki doesn't let you hit a Logia because your arms literally turn into steel. What you do is coat your body with your soul transformed into Haki. On the other hand, Logia users can transform their bodies into their respective elements, such as fire, smoke, and so on, and freely revert to their solid form instantly. This is because the devil fruit's power is intrinsically linked to their soul, and consequently it perfectly understands the host's true form. So when you see a fight between an Armament Haki user and a Logia user, what's really happening is a clash between a pure soul and one with a devil attached. Armament Haki basically consists of becoming a fighting spirit and overwhelming will. When that will comes into contact with a Logia user, it reaches the devil within their soul. The intimidation of that spiritual pressure disrupts the devil's power, and Logia abilities momentarily fail. That's why a Logia's intangibility stops working where Armament Haki touches it. We also learned something important from Garp and Roger's conversation. Even if Haki can neutralize a devil fruit's ability, it only works if your Haki is stronger than your opponent's. If the fruit user has superior Haki to yours, their ability will remain active. That's why Roger and Garp kept hitting rocks with Haki again and again, while he was under the effect of down and reversi, and barely managed to damage him. His Haki simply couldn't surpass Emu's Haki, so the devil fruit power within rocks remained completely active. On the other hand, this also implies that if you truly grasp how Haki functions, you might even be able to confront Emu, who wields one of the most formidable Haki powers in the entire world. And this brings us to the Conqueror's Haki. It has been explained in this way. This is the power that truly overwhelms others. The Conqueror's Haki. You are able to control it, but you cannot train it. This Haki is pure spirit. It only grows as the individual person grows. So this Conqueror's Haki is essentially the brute force of a person's very soul, used to impose their will on others. And since Haki reflects the state of its user's heart, dominating someone with Conqueror's Haki can plunge them deep into fear, which naturally weakens that person's own Haki's potency. The clearest example is the confrontation in Chapter 1122, Joy Boy's King's Haki against Emu's devil-infused will. It's most probable that Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki surpassed the sheer mass of Emu's Haki. That's why the 5 elders of the Gorosei, who were approaching in their yokai forms from Mary Guaz, heading towards Egghead, suddenly reverted to their normal appearances and were compelled to retreat all the way back to Mary Guaz, and Emu was quite clearly trembling with palpable fear. That profound fear, that deep instinctive terror directed towards Joy Boy utterly weakened Emu's fighting spirit. Once Emu's will faltered, the Haki flowing from him dropped, and Joy Boy's Haki then overwhelmed him. As a result, the devil's power attached to Emu's soul was neutralized. So who will defeat Emu? Someone who possesses one of the most powerful devil abilities in top tier Haki. I believe that person is Blackbeard. Recently on Twitter, it was trending that Blackbeard is actually the first character in the entire series to mention Haki, although the translations of the time didn't reflect it well. Before heading to Skypiea, he sensed Luffy's Haki and realized that Luffy was not someone who deserved merely a 30 million berry bounty. Later, when he reunited with Luffy and Impel Down, he even stated, "Your Haki has grown since the last time," demonstrating his keen ability to read Haki in others. The idea that the first character to introduce the concept of Haki is the one who ends up using Haki to defeat the pinnacle of the world government sounds like a perfect narrative closure. And remember, Blackbeard and the world government practically debuted at the same time during the Jaya arc. Their simultaneous introduction feels quite intentional, as if Oda were hinting at their connection right from the very beginning. In the God Valley flashback, Rox met his end feeling frustrated and utterly defeated. In One Piece flashbacks, typically a character suffers a tragic defeat or some great injustice, and then Luffy defeats the enemy in their stead. But this time around, Oda appears to be writing something entirely different. It gives the distinct impression that Blackbeard, who most likely inherited the will of Rock's idea, Zebek, he's the one who will defeat Emu. By the way, the English translation has Blackbeard saying the Yami Yami no Mi can absorb devil fruits, but the original version doesn't say devil fruits, it says the devil's power. What exactly does this mean? That even abilities like Emu's, powers that clearly transcend the normal category of devil fruits, could be stolen by Blackbeard's darkness, and after that, Blackbeard would probably absorb the devil fruit power that is parasitizing Emu's very soul and then become the true final boss. But there is a problem. Blackbeard possesses strong Haki, yes, but it's quite hard to imagine his Haki being at Emu's level. And if his Haki cannot surpass Emu's, then no matter how powerful the dark fruit is, it couldn't absorb Emu's demonic soul. So what's the alternative? One realistic possibility is to weaken the output of Emu's Haki, as we have discussed. Haki is the direct reflection of a person's spirit or will, so if a user's heart is unstable or afraid, their Haki will naturally weaken. This is exactly how it works, and the perfect example was the scene we witnessed earlier. This means that fear itself could be one of the crucial keys to fight against Emu's power. In the Elbaf arc, the title, "What Scares Me," was used twice, and I'm convinced that this is a significant clue. Fear is the weakness that can break Emu's Haki. The concept of fear becomes extremely revealing when we analyze the battle between Zoro and Monet. Zoro didn't actually strike her, he simply instilled fear into her heart, and that single action was sufficient to completely paralyze her. Tashigi sensed this immediately and stated, "Her body is not moving." It's the fear of facing someone overwhelmingly stronger. That reaction is very similar to how God's Knights regenerate more slowly when cut by Conqueror's Haki. It suggests that Conqueror's Haki is fundamentally linked to fear, and that fear weakens the effect of devil fruit abilities. So, the manner in which Blackbeard defeats Emu will likely be by exploiting this particular property. Haki weakens when the heart is completely overcome by fear. The question then is, how do you instill fear in Emu? Well, Rox already provided the answer. Who is more frightening, Davy Jones or Joy Boy? Those two are Emu's greatest fears. We've already seen Emu tremble just by sensing Joy Boy's presence, so it's entirely plausible Emu would fall into that same state if Blackbeard, through him, makes Emu sense Davy Jones's presence. Now, why does Emu dread Davy Jones so much? I believe the reason lies in Davy Jones's unique ability, something only he possessed. And the biggest clue is the explanation Robin gives regarding Davy Jones. All the ships and treasures that sink to the bottom of the sea end up stored in his locker. This implies that Davy Jones's own body functions as a locker, a vessel capable of containing lost souls. I believe it's very possible that this ability has been passed down to Blackbeard. After all, Blackbeard can consume multiple devil fruits, and the reason this is even possible might be that his body functions much like Davy Jones's locker, a place that is able to house multiple souls within its depths. At one point, Ace posed the question, where exactly does Thatch's soul go after he is killed? Perhaps he feared Thatch's soul would be trapped inside Blackbeard forever. And in real-world history, Blackbeard was known as Edward Teach, but he was also called Edward Thatch. So symbolically, it fits, let the world of One Piece allow the three souls of Teach, Thatch, and Edward to coexist within Blackbeard's body. By the way, in Japanese, locker and rocker are written the same. And when you think of a rocker in One Piece, you think of Soul King, Brook, a musician who literally manipulates people's souls. Indeed, on the cover of chapter 1098, the word rock is written behind Soul King, so we have an interesting parallel, a Blackbeard carrying a locker full of others' souls, and a rocker, Soul King, controlling the souls of the living. Another major clue regarding the Davy family's connection to soul-related abilities was recently revealed. It happened in God Valley, when the Davy family members were gathered on stage. One of the celestial dragons said, "You are Buccaneers too, aren't you?" In the English version, this line was translated as if it referred to the Buccaneers' actual race, but in Japanese, the way it's phrased leaves room for a different interpretation. It doesn't have to refer to that specific race. And why do I say this? When the Celestial Knights spoke of Kuma previously, they said that brat from the Buccaneer tribe. And when Saturn and Vegapunk referred to the Buccaneers as a race, they consistently used the term Buccaneer tribe. But in this God Valley scene, the Celestial Dragon does not use the suffix Zoku, which is normally added to the names of races or clans in Japanese. The fact that he didn't specifically say Buccaneer tribe suggests something quite important. The word Buccaneer within the world of One Piece might actually hold an additional meaning, something entirely separate from the concept of a race or a species. And another crucial detail to consider is the exchange that took place between Vegapunk and Kuma. Vegapunk, for some reason, explained to Kuma that the soul truly exists. And there is another crucial line in Egghead connected to this. There is no scientific reason why Kuma could move, much less reach this island where Bonnie is. So is it true? Is the special trait of the Buccaneers not their physical strength? In the past, they were considered to be. The fact that Vegapunk said this right after seeing Kuma, who had completely lost his personality, appear on Egghead as if he had been driven by his own will to protect Bonnie suggests something very clear. Probably the true trait of the Buccaneers is the ability to move a body that should already be dead, and that ability comes from their soul. When Kuma punches Saturn and then immediately hugs Bonnie, it's clear that he used armament Haki in the punch. There's no way he could have done this without Kuma's consciousness still being present in that body, so we can safely assert that Kuma's soul still resides within that modified body. We've already seen a similar phenomenon before, thanks to the Yomi Yomi fruit. Brook died and his soul traveled to the underworld, but thanks to his own will, he managed to return to the world of the living. What Brook does through a devil fruit, the Buccaneers seem capable of doing naturally, as a trait of their race. The main difference is that Kuma cannot move freely like Brook, but when Bonnie asked Lilith, "Can you fix my dad too?" Lilith replied, "Of course." Many readers were confused by that response, but we can explain it. Brook, who can manipulate his own soul, once said, "My soul emits an energy that is almost solid, so it can exist in this world." Kuma, on the other hand, was stripped of his consciousness and became a human weapon controlled entirely by science. He could only move by the orders of the Celestial Dragons or the Marines, and right now he's completely shut down. So even if his soul isn't actually within him, he wouldn't be able to move his body unless he were to generate an extremely powerful energy. But if Lilith removes the effects of Saturn's total shutdown switch and erases the programming that forces Kuma to obey, then if Kuma's soul is truly still inside that body, he should be able to move freely, just like Brook. In other words, Kuma could return as a being who possesses his own will through his soul, but moving with a totally artificial body, a modern version of the ancient Emeth. So when the Celestial Dragon said, "You are also Buccaneers," he may not have been speaking of a race at all. Instead, he could have been referring to a group of people who can manipulate souls, and the Davy family, who can store souls within their bodies, would naturally be included in that group. It is very probable that this is why they were grouped together and all called Buccaneers. If that is the case, then those whom Emu fears the most are precisely the Buccaneers and the Davy family. That is to say, the people who can directly manipulate souls. The reason why they were so hated, erased from history, and hunted down could be because they are Emu's natural enemies. After all, Emu is a soul without a physical body, and that's why Blackbeard, who possesses that same power, will eventually confront Emu. When Emu senses the presence of Davy Jones within Blackbeard, fear will take hold of him. As soon as that fear invades him, Blackbeard's Haki will surpass Emu's, and Blackbeard will use darkness to rip the devil fruit power from Emu's soul. That's how Blackbeard will end up getting Emu's devil fruit power. It's exactly like Big Mom's soul focus. If you feel fear, your soul can be ripped from your body. In Emu's case, the devil that is attached to his soul will be ripped out, and Blackbeard will rise up as the final boss who will stand in the way of Luffy. Now then, at this very moment, Emu, who has taken possession of Gunko's body, is in Elbaf with a giant army that has been transformed into demons by the dummy Reversi. In God Valley, Roger and Garp had to unleash their Haki to the maximum to break Rox's dummy Reversi. That means Luffy would have to overcome the mass of Emu's Haki in the same way. The question is, how will Luffy increase his Haki this time? I believe Elbaf will also be the arc where Luffy powers up his Conqueror's Haki. On Whole Cake Island, he trained his observation Haki and learned to see a little into the future. In Wano, he trained armament Haki and mastered Ryo, so in Elbaf, finally, it makes sense for him to take his Conqueror's Haki to the next level. Gaben revealed that depending on how Luffy uses Conqueror's Haki, he can counteract the regeneration ability of the Divine Knights. Even so, Luffy has already shown indications of that power during his fight with Kaido, and Luffy specifically asked, "You can also imbue your attacks with Conqueror's Haki, can't you?" And the colored version of the manga made it abundantly clear that yes, Luffy did indeed use Conqueror's Haki coding in his powerful blows. However, on Egghead, despite the fact that Luffy completely crushed Saturn and sent him flying, Saturn immediately began to regenerate himself. That means Luffy wasn't yet using Conqueror's Haki effectively enough to stop the regeneration. If you look at the panels, you'll see it with some clarity. When Luffy strikes Saturn or any Gorosei, the lightning effect of Conqueror's Haki doesn't appear. But when Gaban cuts Summers, the classic Haki lightning effect, Conqueror's Haki, is clearly shown. That's the difference, and what Luffy still needs to master. Now, let's take a closer look at the Japanese expression that Gaben used. He said, and I quote, "Engrave deeply in your liver the precise way you utilize Conqueror's Haki. Remember, those individuals are not truly immortal." The Japanese phrase Kimo ni Meijiro can be translated as, "Engrave this deeply within your heart and never ever forget it." It is specifically used when someone imparts a very serious warning or a crucial lesson that you absolutely must take to heart and apply diligently from this moment forward. Kimo literally means liver, but in Japanese, it also represents courage or a person's spirit. Meijiru means to engrave, like carving letters into metal or stone. So the idea is to carve something deeply into your mind. Gaban is telling Luffy he needs a higher level of mental and spiritual control, a deeper awareness to unleash his full power. In fact, Gaben warned Zoro about this very thing with his phrase, "Haki only becomes a true power when you are conscious of it and can control it." This means that Zoro wasn't fully aware of his own ability. That's why he hadn't been properly using his Conqueror's Haki until now. And then Luffy told him, "Your Haki is leaking everywhere." That expression suggests something like spilling out of control, like water gushing from a broken pipe. Luffy's phrase implies that Zoro possessed this power the entire time, but by not acknowledging it, he was letting it simply go to waste. This reminds us that even if someone has talents, if they don't understand the true nature of their Haki or their abilities, they won't be able to truly use them. This means that the essence of Conqueror's Haki is to intimidate the opponent, make them feel fear, and weaken the strength of their Haki. So if Luffy and Zoro become fully aware of their own Conqueror's Haki and learn to properly coat themselves with it, and if their Haki surpasses that of the Divine Knights, then the regeneration of these Knights, which also stems from a demonic power, would naturally weaken. And once Luffy truly learns to concretely utilize Conqueror's Haki, he will begin to rely more and more on it in combat. If that happens, the risk of him developing an incurable disease like Roger's becomes very real. Abusing such overwhelming Haki could push his body beyond its limits, and that is precisely where Chopper would come in. Chopper followed Gaban to the underworld after Gaban fell, but Chopper and Gerd also stayed behind to care for Gaban. It's quite likely that here Chopper will acquire medical skills or techniques from the giants, and perhaps even gain insights into medicine from Gaban himself. Gaban isn't a doctor, but when Roger fell ill, he remained with Roger up in the mountains, actively protecting him from those pirates who were coming to assassinate him. This could have very well occurred right before Crocus officially joined their crew. Until then, it's possible Gaban was serving as a temporary doctor, and during that period, he might have realized Roger's incurable illness was connected to the strain from constantly using overwhelming Haki. There's another detail about Gaban. At some point, we don't know precisely when, he reunited with Crocus at the Twin Capes. It's possible they were both discussing new medical techniques to counteract Roger's illness. So Gaban gave Luffy the hint he needed about Conqueror's Haki, but he probably also understood that Luffy might overuse it and end up damaging his own body, just like Roger. And now, coincidentally, Gaban is sitting right next to Chopper, the Straw Hat's doctor. This will surely mean he'll tell Chopper something about Crocus. Laugh Tale is probably located somewhere near the very deepest part of the New World, right around the Red Line. After Luffy finds it, his body might start to collapse, and he could become gravely ill, just like Roger did. And at that exact moment, while Brook is meeting Laboon, Chopper would meet Crocus and learn the necessary treatment to save Luffy's life. That might be the path Oda is preparing for them. By the way, there's one more ability Luffy needs to master, the power to hear the voice of all things. It's not confirmed to be a form of Haki, but given that its essence is to perceive presences, we can consider it an extension of Haki, and I believe this ability is what will ultimately guide him to Laugh Tale. The clue is in this scene. Even though Luffy couldn't see him with his own eyes, he said, "Chopper is falling." It's as if he could sense Chopper falling from the surface world. Luffy himself was confused. He didn't know how he knew it was Chopper, but that's precisely why I think it's a sign that he's starting to awaken the ability to hear the voice of all things, which is the same power Roger was said to possess. For example, in Wano, when Shanks unleashed that overwhelming Haki, Luffy smiled and said, "A familiar face just popped into my head." Even Aramaki, Green Bull, who was far away at the time, instantly realized that Haki belonged to Shanks the moment he felt it. And on Egghead, when Kizaru arrived, Luffy immediately sensed it. "Someone very strong has arrived," he said. Until now, Luffy had only been able to sense powerful Haki when they were actively emitting it. But now, it appears that this is changing. He's starting to perceive individuals even if they're not actively using their Haki, provided their emotions or presence are sufficiently intense. This could truly be the beginning of something enormous. In essence, what transpired was that Luffy felt Chopper's will and perceived it manifesting as Haki. Now, I know exactly what many of you must be thinking. Wait a minute, but Chopper can't even use Haki. If you have followed this video all the way through, the answer should be quite obvious. It is not some kind of special superpower. It's a natural part of every living being. The majority of people simply never realize that they possess this power or never manage to bring it out. At the very least, everyone has a presence, what in Japanese we would call Kai or fighting spirit. Now, watch Chopper as he falls. You can clearly see how desperate he is to save Gaben. That determination, that resolution is pure strength of will, and Luffy is finally reaching the point where he can sense that kind of will, even from someone who isn't consciously releasing Haki. That's exactly what Roger's voice of all things was all about. Remember that someone once told Luffy, "Even among those who master observation Haki, you possess a special gift for sensing the feelings of Ikemono." Ikemono technically means living being, but in everyday use, it almost always refers to animals. Luffy has always had this natural ability to connect with non-human creatures. He even tamed the beasts of the underworld instantly, and since Chopper is half reindeer, perhaps that made it even easier for Luffy to perceive him. So what exactly is the true purpose of the voice of all things? When Robin asked why Roger could read the ancient script, Rayleigh simply replied, "Roger could hear the voice of all things, that's all." But if you think about it, Roger actually couldn't read the poneglyphs. The one who deciphered them was Odin. That tells us something. That ability isn't just for translating ancient texts. It must have another purpose. And I believe that purpose is directly connected to reaching Laugh Tale. Inuarashi described Laugh Tale as an invisible island, and it makes perfect sense. No one had ever reached it before Roger's crew, and since then, no one else has succeeded. If Laugh Tale were just a common island floating in the sea, you'd think someone would have stumbled upon it by accident at this point. And if it were underwater, perhaps some Gyojin or a submarine would have found it. Even someone with flight powers could have spotted it from the sky. But no one has seen it. According to an official pamphlet for the movie film Red, Conqueror's Haki also has the ability to suppress your presence and block others from using observation Haki to perceive you. That's why I believe Laugh Tale's presence has been completely erased, hidden from all detection by the overwhelming power of Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki. It's as if the entire island was covered by an invisible mantle, its presence wiped from the world. So to find it, maps and poneglyphs aren't enough. You need someone who can hear those voices. And I believe that once Luffy fully awakens that power, that's when he'll finally be able to set foot on Laugh Tale. That is when we will uncover all the secrets of this world, what the Void Century truly represented, who the D-Clan members are, what the ancient weapons consist of, and that Wano was, in ancient times, highly connected to the rest of the world. It's very possible that Roger's pirates managed to learn the entire history, because Roger heard the voice of all things that had been left behind in Laugh Tale. I want to give credit to the person who created this, who is from the Dawn and Dust channel, someone who is a native Japanese speaker, and who obviously shows it a lot in their translations and kanji separation. A huge greeting to them, and we'll see you in the next video.